Now that we've learned how PHP works and we've learned how MySQL works, we're ready to put the two halves together and to learn how to use PHP with MySQL. And that's what we're going to do in this chapter. Connecting to a database involves 5 steps. Keep this in mind. Every time we interact with the database, there are 5 steps. First, we have to create a connection to the database. Second, we have to select the database that we want to use. Third, we're going to perform our database query, our MySQL statement. And then fourth, we'll use that returned data, if there was any, to do whatever we want to do. So let's say we've returned a list of students in a classroom. We'll then output each of those student names. And fifth, we'll close the connection that we created at the beginning. And we're always going to use those 5 steps. Now, if we've created a connection and we've already selected a database, then we can perform step 3 and 4 multiple times and continue performing queries on that database before we finally close it at the end. But the basic steps will always be like this. So we're going to break it down, and we're going to walk through each of these 5 steps to see how we perform these using PHP functions. I'm going to go ahead and go back into my PHP sandbox again and open up my basic.html that I've been using from time to time as a good starting point for a file. It has HTML that I can use as a framework. And I'm going to do save as on it, and we're going to call this one databases. And then it's still going to have the PHP at the end, and this way you will be able to refer back to this to see what the 5 steps are for creating databases. Now the first step is that we want to create a database connection, and we're going to want to do that before we do anything else. We don't have to, but generally, since we know that our page is going to be database enabled, why not go ahead and enable it from the very beginning by making a connection here? So right here, I'm going to drop in my first bit of PHP. Step 1, create a database connection. And I'm going to use the command mysql_connect. Now, if it so happens that you're using a database besides MySQL, there are other commands that you would issue in place of this. There's one for PostgreSQL. I believe it's MSSQL_connect if you're using Microsoft. But the steps are going to be similar, even though the commands are a little bit different. And MySQL Connect is always going to take 3 arguments. These should look familiar to us from when we set up our database and when we set up phpMyAdmin. Localhost will be the server that we're on. We're going to log in as the user root and with our password. And my password that I set early on was OTL, capital PHP07. So that sets up a connection, and it returns a value here to connection. And that value is actually going to be what's called a handle. And it's going to be a way that we can refer to this connection throughout the rest of our page. So we've assigned that handle that it returns, the returned value as a reference to the connection. We've assigned that to the variable connection. Now, you could have it assigned to something else. A lot of people just use DB for their database. But I'm going to use connection. Before we go on to the next step, we want to test and make sure that that connection occurred successfully. Because if not, we certainly don't want to continue processing the rest of our page. We can do that by using an if statement like the one that I've just pasted in. If there's not a connection, you remember that the exclamation point means not. So if not a connection, then, and here's a new function for us, it's called die. And die means completely just exit out, quit, and return this error at the same time. And if we want to see what this actually does, we can try it in our browser and go ahead and load up the page, and we'll try it with different variables in there to see whether or not it succeeds. So let's bring up Firefox. Let's load up our new page, http://localhost. If you're on a PC, that's fine. If you're on a Mac, you'll also need to put in your username. And then we're going to just specify PHP sandbox, because that's still where we're working, databases.php. Okay, and it didn't return anything back to me except basic, but it did successfully make a database connection because it didn't come back with any kind of an error. If we try it with something different, let's say that we just change our password. We'll take out the O at the front of it, save the file, and then try again. It comes back and says, nope, MySQL Connect gave me a warning and said access was denied, using password yes, database connection failed, and so on. So it returned an error to us, which allows us to just stop right there and know that we didn't make a successful connection. Now, it's displaying this error to us because we have error display turned on. We could turn it off when we actually put our machine in production so that people wouldn't necessarily get this same error message. But for now, we'll make our password correct again. But we know that our function is working, and we can go ahead and proceed to step 2, which is to select the database. We've made the connection. Now we need to select it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my database selection. Now I've gone ahead and put in both halves of the code because we're going to want to do the same thing. We're going to want to do the mysql_select_db command, and we're going to tell it which database we want, Widget Corp, and we're going to tell it which connection to use to get there. So you see where we're using that handle that we've established in the connection. So we're saying use that connection and select Widget Corp. It's the same as when we were inside MySQL and we typed the use Widget Corp database after we created it. And we're going to return the results of that to DB select, and then we can test that. Did DB select succeed or not? If it did, great, keep going. If not, then die with database selection failed, and return whatever error MySQL gave. That's what that last part does. And we saw that in our browser in a similar way with MySQL Connect. It'll just return that failure and that error message. Now that we've made a database connection and selected the database, we're ready to move on to the third step.